Finally, no more baggage. Starting today, I'm living with my parents at my place.
As soon as my parents passed away, my husband, Matthew, who had our family home demolished, spat this out to me, who stood dumbfounded in front of where our home used to be. What are you talking about?
Have you lost your mind? Come to our house quickly with the inheritance.
I couldn't help but burst into laughter at his words. I see. So that's what this was about.
What? Why are you laughing?
Don't you guys know?
Know what?
Matthew, along with his parents, John and Elizabeth, looked at me, puzzled by my laughter. I then told the three of them the truth. My name is Michelle Naxon. I was born the eldest daughter to my parents, who were typical office workers. I have one brother. We were a very ordinary family. At 29, I married Matthew, and we had 2 kids. While working, I struggled with raising children, and before I knew it, I was already 55. My son, Sean, and daughter, Ava, had grown up and become respectable working adults. Now, they each live alone and seem to be struggling with their new jobs. It's time for me and my husband to slow down. It's been an ordinary life, but a happy one. I always thought we'd continue to age like this. But that ordinary life changed completely one winter's day. My father was suddenly taken from us in an accident. He was only 72. The whole family was engulfed in grief. It affected especially my mother, Susan, who was so depressed she couldn't eat. Mom, I feel you, but you have to eat. I kept telling her that.
I know, but I just don't have the appetite. I feel tightness in my chest.
Michael and I thought it was just her grief. But within half a month, she rapidly lost weight. Worried, I took her to the hospital. Cancer. I was shocked when the doctor diagnosed her. It was too advanced for surgery, and she had about a year left. I hadn't even begun to repay my parents for all they'd done for me. And now, just after losing my father, my mother too, I was more devastated than ever. But I couldn't afford to wallow in sorrow. Michael lived too far to help. So it was up to me. I immediately told Matthew that I wanted to live with my mother. She shouldn't be alone, both emotionally and physically, in her condition. But Matthew's reaction was not what I expected.
What? We just finished dealing with one funeral. And now I have to be bothered with your mother too?
He sighed in annoyance. Don't talk like that.
Can't you just drive her to the hospital? Why do we have to live with her?
She'll feel lonely. If it's too much, maybe I can just stay with her at her place for a while. I suggested that to him. Then Matthew snapped.
What? And who's gonna cook for me then?
I'll still come over to cook.
What about cleaning? Laundry? Who's going to take care of that?
I fell silent. I wanted to do everything I could, but I couldn't be in 2 places at once. If someone said that wanting to help and nurse my mother was just my selfishness, I couldn't argue back. I'm sure Mom would insist on not being a bother, saying everything should stay as it is. but I just really wanted to care for my mother no matter what.
Fine, but I'm not helping with anything.
Matthew said that reluctantly to me, who had fallen silent. He finally gave in, though grudgingly. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Though it was tough, at least he agreed to my wish. I replied to him while suppressing my anger at his attitude. Despite some initial difficulties, Matthew and I began living with my mom at my childhood home. We originally lived in a company house provided by Matthew's employer. Matthew was an only child. His father, John, particularly wanted us to live with them eventually, so there were no plans to buy our own home. Living in the company house was convenient for work and wasn't a big financial burden, costing about $300 a month in rent. But moving to my childhood home meant no more rent payments and more space. I thought moving in wasn't all bad for Matthew. He stayed true to his word and didn't help with anything, but for me, it was great to live with my mom. She seemed fine but often felt tired and spent a lot of time resting during the day. I prepared my mom's meals, fed her, and got her medication ready. Doing all this alone would have been impossible.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a big help having you here. I should thank Matthew too.
Mom often said that, expressing her gratitude towards us. She didn't know about Matthew's harsh words when we first moved in, so she was grateful to him too. One evening, after Mom had gone to bed, Matthew came home. While serving dinner, I spoke up about Mom's treatment. Then, Matthew glared at me and said, "Just don't say to ask me to help you. Whatever you say, I told you I'm not helping with anything," refusing even to listen. Anyone needs someone to talk to share their worries. I just wanted him to listen. But his attitude didn't change, not after a month, not even after 2. He constantly complained about living with my mom, acting like he was doing us a great favor. His behavior got worse every day. But I couldn't say anything to him. I was stressed, worrying about Mom, and trying to be considerate of Matthew. Then, as Mom's 1-year prognosis approached, her condition worsened rapidly, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Though I had been preparing myself, it hit me hard. My brother Michael's family and my kids, Sean and Ava, came quickly to help. You'd expect your husband to be there for you at such times, but Matthew was in a corner laughing with his parents, John and Elizabeth, not helping with the funeral at all. Michael took over as the chief mourner, and we managed to prepare for the funeral. However, Matthew sat at the back of the family section, instead of with me, the bereaved family. "Matthew, I think you should sit in the bereaved family section." But he replied,
"No, I'm fine here. I'm not really a blood relative."
"But you're my husband." Elizabeth chimed in.
"He's a husband, yes, but not your mother's son. He's our son, an outsider."
Right. Matthew is our son. You can sit in the bereaved section, Michelle.
John agreed, and their words left me speechless. It varies by region, but in the area where my in-laws and I live, It's customary for sons-in-law to sit in the bereaved family section. As expected, Matthew was nowhere to be seen in the family section at the funeral, leading to whispered speculations among distant relatives. Did they get divorced? I could hear them murmuring to each other. It was a talk that should not have happened if Matthew had just sat beside me. Despite my disappointment with Matthew, we managed to send Mom off properly. After the funeral, we returned to my childhood home with Michael's family, my kids, Matthew, and his parents. Thank you, John and Elizabeth, for coming during this busy time, I said to my in-laws while serving them tea. They laughed and replied,
Really, it's been tough. First your dad passed away, and now your mom. We've been hit hard with funeral expenses.
But at least that's over now.
I was stunned by their words. What did they mean by that? I couldn't believe they would say something like that. I forced a smile and excused myself from the room. Then, I overheard Matthew talking with his parents in the background.
It must have been hard for you, Matthew, living with someone who's not family.
Yeah, dealing with Michelle's whims was tough.
You shouldn't always give in to your wife. It's okay to say no if you don't like something. You're a married couple, after all.
I clenched my fists in frustration. The sound of their laughter and carefree conversation was unbearable, but this wasn't new. John and Elizabeth had always been insensitive and rude. When I married Matthew, Elizabeth had said, "Couldn't you find someone prettier? I can't expect much from the grandkids' looks now." John had added, "They say beauty bores after 3 days. With Michelle, you won't even get the chance to get bored in the first place." And Matthew just laughed along with them, saying that's funny. Such disrespectful behavior from them wasn't surprising anymore. I felt something snap inside me. Reflecting back, neither Matthew nor his parents had ever shown concern for me, not during my father's funeral, and not now. Instead, they mocked and belittled me. I felt guilty for forcing Matthew into this living situation, but I started questioning his behavior as a person. I had wanted to focus solely on my mother, yet I had been overly considerate of him. I realized there was no need for me to feel so guilty towards him, especially since he never stood by my side. Behind my growing anger, they were still laughing and chatting. If Michael's family or my kids had heard them, they would have been upset, but thankfully, they were in the kitchen. I was relieved that I was the only one who heard their conversation in the other room. As I thought about all this, I could still hear Elizabeth's voice continuing in the background.
Michelle,
Startled, I responded.
can I take this?
Elizabeth approached, holding my mother's handbag. Confused, I stammered,
Your mom won't be needing this anymore, won't she? Matthew said I should take this. Maybe I should.
Elizabeth examined the bag like she was appraising it. It was so disrespectful, especially right after the funeral. I wrested the bag away from her. "No, you can't."
Excuse me.
Her eyes flashed with anger. Not so much at losing the bag, but at my defiance against her. Still, I stood my ground. I'm not ready to sort through my mother's belongings yet. We'll divide them among the family later. Elizabeth turned bright red with rage.
What do you mean? Are you saying I'm not family?
You said at the funeral that even Matthew was not family to my mother. How come you're family when Matthew is not? I couldn't help but retort. Hearing this, Matthew and John also turned red.
What are you saying? Apologize to Mom.
How dare you say like that? You're just a daughter-in-law.
The commotion attracted everyone from the other room.
I can't believe I'm called a stranger after sticking around for the funeral and burial, despite being busy. Dad, let's go home.
Elizabeth shouted at me in front of everyone and left our house. Strangely, Matthew, too, was angry and left with his parents.
What happened? Did you really call Elizabeth a stranger?
Everyone else, having only heard Elizabeth's side, asked me. Taken out of context, it must have sounded terrible. But I explained the situation to them. Not one person blamed me.
Both Grandma and Grandpa should be more considerate.
It's the same with Dad. Their family has always been like that.
The kids sided with me, but I couldn't forgive those three. Matthew didn't come home for a while after that. I didn't contact him either. I didn't think I should apologize, nor did I feel I could forgive him. But I knew things couldn't stay that way forever. Then, one day, Matthew came home. Welcome back. Seeing his face reignited my anger, but I suppressed it and greeted him. Then he said,
It's been tough, hasn't it?
His brusque words, but his attempt at showing concern, surprised me.
Why don't you take the kids and go on a trip? It'll be a good change of scenery.
Then he handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. Tears started to flow. Maybe the kids had put him up to it. But I was happy he went along with it. I immediately contacted the kids to plan the trip.
Dad did.
That's unusual.
They were surprised by my proposal. So it seemed like it really was Matthew's gift. Maybe Dad feels bad about it. I said that while laughing. And I gratefully accepted the travel vouchers from Matthew. Well then, I'm off.
All right. Take your time. While you're at it, stay over at the kids' places.
What? I can't be gone that long.
It's fine. I'm gonna relax at my parents' place. So don't worry about me.
He replied me while sending me off. Ava happily welcomed the idea of my visit. So before the trip, I visited both Ava and Sean's homes. Since I couldn't visit them while caring for Mom, I helped out a bit by making some meals and freezing them.
Mom, you're supposed to be relaxing, not working. But thanks, this really helps.
They both said that, delighted to have my cooking at home. It was all thanks to Matthew's suggestion. And finally, the much-awaited beach resort vacation came. I spent a relaxing time at the beach with my kids. It seemed to heal the fatigue from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents. I ended up being away for nearly a week, but the kids returned to their homes with bright smiles.
It was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while.
True, once in a while. But I wonder if he's up to something.
Ava joked, laughing. Don't say that. Dad did think about us in his way. I replied her while laughing too. Thinking of sharing memories with Matthew and looking forward to a happy life ahead as a couple, I headed home. However, upon arriving home, I was shocked. What? The house. I looked around in disbelief. Although I was at the familiar place, the family home was gone. Suddenly, Matthew appeared out of nowhere. He was followed by John and Elizabeth. Seeing me standing there in shock, they all smirked and laughed. "Matthew, what's going on?" I demanded an explanation. With the same creepy smile as his parents, Matthew said,
Finally, no more burden. From today, we're living with my parents.
"What are you talking about?" I replied coldly. He then said,
Have you lost your mind? I've demolished your family home. Come to our place quickly with your inheritance.
Whatever you inherited is Matthew's now.
I realized then. The house's disappearance was Matthew's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. What a betrayal it was, especially after I had come home thinking about our future together. I was filled with frustration and sadness. But I wouldn't let Matthew have his way. Not a chance, I thought. I burst out laughing at the three smirking faces. Confused by my laughter, John and Matthew wore puzzled expressions.
What? Why are you laughing?
What a weird woman. Has she gone mad?
Elizabeth remarked, looking at me as if I was something bizarre. Facing the three, I said, "You guys don't know."
What are you talking about?
Matthew asked. "I didn't even inherit a single penny, so there's no inheritance." I laughed again after finishing my sentence. They must have mistaken the inheritance for wealth. Their misguided assumptions and actions were so ridiculous that I couldn't stop laughing.
What do you mean? Explain yourself.
Matthew demanded. But I remained silent. I saw no need to explain anything to them. Before that, I won't live with anyone else. If you want to live together with your parents, feel free to do it yourself. Ignoring Matthew's question, I rejected his initial suggestion outright, causing my mother-in-law to burst into anger.
How can you help out at your parents' house but not with ours?
You know there were circumstances for that, right?
I moved in to help out, didn't I?
I told you that you didn't need to live with me, but you chose to move in because you didn't want to do housework, remember? Faced with my retorts, Matthew and Elizabeth bit their lips in frustration. And how dare you demolish our family home without permission? There's a right and a wrong way to do things. I shouted at the three of them right there and then. And I left the scene. Behind me, I heard Matthew's voice calling, "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. I had to find a place to sleep that night, and I really didn't want to see Matthew's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. Demolishing a house can't be that easy. The house was still in my mother's name. I was wondering who did the demolition when an unbelievable truth came to light. Matthew and John had demolished it themselves. John, who worked in demolition, had called in favors from friends and even rented heavy machinery, They were thoroughly prepared. Moreover, they had given me a travel voucher just to get me out of the house. I was on the verge of tears, feeling pathetic for being deceived and furious at the same time. Is there any way to punish all three of them? I asked my lawyer through tears. He smiled kindly and said,
Matthew can be charged with property destruction for demolishing the house that was in your mother's name, and you can claim damages.
I nodded at his words. The lawyer immediately started the proceedings. A few days later, Matthew called me in a fury.
What's this notice of claim?
Oh, did it arrive? You destroyed our precious house. You need to compensate for it.
Compensate? I said we were moving into my family's home. We demolished a house nobody was going to live in. You should be thanking us, not asking for compensation. Get your inheritance and come back to our place.
Matthew said arrogantly. Thank you for demolishing it without permission. Don't make me laugh, and get your inheritance and come home. There's no inheritance because I didn't inherit anything. I shouted back over the phone. Matthew fell silent, not knowing how to respond. He was taken aback by my yelling, something I rarely do. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was exactly this. I had a year to spend with my mother. Of course, we talked about inheritance. I told her, I don't need anything. Give it all to Michael. So, all the cash and assets went to my brother, Michael. He said that I should have the house. He lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I didn't live there, it could be rented out. That's why I was supposed to inherit the house. Anyway, either you and John restore our family home to its original state, or pay the amount stated in the claim.
That amount?
I'm considering a settlement, but if you can't pay, I'll file a report and sue you. I said firmly.
I didn't think you'd get so angry.
Of course I'd get angry. Matthew started making excuses. He seemed to think that as long as our family home was there, he couldn't live with his own parents. John, especially, had always wanted to live with us. He really liked Sean and wanted to live with him. Matthew was the one who refused to move in previously, citing it was difficult to commute. But unbeknownst to them, John and Elizabeth thought I was the one against it. They fought destroying my family home, and taking the inheritance would force me to move in with them. But now, knowing all this, I just couldn't forgive them.
So please, cut me some slack. I didn't mean any harm. Dad's sorry too.
If you're really sorry, then you'll agree to the settlement. I said this and hung up the phone. Matthew kept calling and texting, apologizing over and over. If you're really sorry, then just pay up. I pushed him away. I knew my childhood home couldn't be brought back, but this was the only way I could deal with my feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Ava's house. Michael's family and even my kids knew about everything. Despite his anger about our house being destroyed, Michael said, I won't interfere, but I'll help if you need it. Do what you think is best, Michelle. Everyone condemned Matthew's actions and supported me. A month passed without any compensation or damages paid. I didn't hear anything from Matthew during this time. I couldn't impose on Ava forever. I wanted to get the money and at least sort out a place for me to live. But contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It all started with a casual comment from Ava.
Hey, this apron looks like Grandma's.
Ava showed me her smartphone screen as she muttered this. Looking at the screen, my eyes widened in shock. It was a listing on a flea market app. The apron she pointed out was the one I had made for my mom, a one-of-a-kind item. What do you mean? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so I know it.
What?
Ava quickly started checking other listings. The seller seemed to be new, with no transactions or ratings let. There were about 30 items listed, and to my shock, all belonged to my mother. I immediately realized it was Matthew's doing. He was the only one who could have taken these things from our demolished home. I called him right away. What's this about the app?
App.
Matthew replied, sounding annoyed. Thinking he was playing dumb, I was furious. Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's stuff without permission. Take down those listings right now. But Matthew sounded panicked.
What? No, it's not me.
Who else could it be? I'm coming over to get everything back. I hung up and headed to my in-laws' house with Ava. Where are Mom's belongings? As soon as we arrived at my in-laws' house, I called out for Matthew. Confronting him right at the entrance, we faced each other.
I don't know anything about it.
Tell the truth, Dad.
Ava joined in, supporting me. Matthew was flustered. Just then, John and Elizabeth appeared, realizing we were there.
So, Ava, you're here.
Elizabeth smiled happily upon seeing Ava. But Ava, clearly angry, confronted her.
Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth.
The truth.
It looks like Dad is selling the stuff Grandma left behind when she passed away recently.
Elizabeth burst out laughing at Ava's words. Matthew looked troubled and kept repeating, "It's really not me." Then Elizabeth said loudly,
Matthew's selling them. It can't be.
But
Because I'm the one selling them.
Hearing those words, I felt a chill run through me. Matthew must have known. He looked at Elizabeth with a face that screamed, "This is bad." Despite Ava's shocked expression, Elizabeth remained cheerfully oblivious. "What do you mean?"
It's a lot of work, you know, packing carefully, taking good photos.
Elizabeth talked about the app as if selling stolen items was a fun hobby. I had to restrain myself from lashing out.
cancel the listings. Those aren't yours to sell.
Ava, red-faced and teary, pleaded with Elizabeth. But Elizabeth seemed annoyed.
What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can and sell the rest for a little extra cash. It's good for preventing dementia too. Now I'm the only grandma you have, Ava. You want me to stay healthy and live a long life, right?
Elizabeth said this nonchalantly. Despite my pleas for her to stop, she showed no signs of remorse. If talking won't work, then I had no choice but to take action. Let's go, Ava.
But
Come on. I pulled her away, and we headed straight to the police station. I hadn't planned to report the house demolition, but theft was a different story. I explained everything to the police, including the unauthorized sale of my mom's belongings. They acted quickly, and the app suspended Elizabeth's account. The items wouldn't be sold anymore. Finally, some relief. On the way back from the police station, I called Matthew. I had your mom's account stopped. You knew about it, right? That makes you an accomplice.
No,
Also, I've filed a report with the police. Please cooperate with the investigation. Matthew became frantic at my words.
What? We're family, aren't we? Please withdraw it.
Family, I haven't seen a dime of the damages or compensation for our demolished house. There's no sign of remorse from you. Matthew was at a loss for words against my anger. But I wasn't heartless. Despite everything, I did have a history with Matthew. With a sigh, I continued. I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. And John, he looked quite ill. Has he been to the doctor?
Huh?
Just passing the message. I'm not heartless, you know. With that, I hung up. I had just seen John. He was so thin, it was hard to believe it had only been a couple of months since we last met. He barely spoke, and his complexion was beyond pale, almost ghastly. It was obvious that he was not in good health. But they probably hadn't noticed. Elizabeth, trying to sell stolen goods nonchalantly, and Matthew, who only acted tough in front of me. That mother and son duo seemed to lack any concern for others. The next day, I received a call from John. I thought it might be a word of gratitude, but it turned out to be the complete opposite. The call was a reprimand. Why are you treating me like I'm sick? Planning to throw me in a hospital to get rid of me. I have to protect Elizabeth and Matthew from you. I'm not going to any hospital, he scolded me. His words showed no appreciation for my concern. Sorry for overstepping. I was just worried.
Unlike your parents, I'm not weak and short-lived. Don't make fun of me.
But a few days later, he did get sick and end up going to the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Panicked, Matthew called me.
Dad's got terminal cancer. What am I going to do?
But I just snorted. That's not my problem. Remember what he said when I suggested going to the hospital. I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. You're on your own.
How can you be so heartless?
Use heartless. Did you ever say anything kind to me when my mother was ill? Reflect on your actions. I hung up. As expected, John passed away not long after. I didn't shed a tear, remembering all the harsh words and deeds. After the funeral, John's will was found. Despite his claims of not being short-lived, he had made careful arrangements.
The house goes to my grandson, Sean. The rest of my assets are to be split between my wife and eldest son.
I was surprised to see Sean's name. John had always favored him, wanting him to live in the house, even after his death. For Sean, it was an unexpected inheritance. Disown it, you don't need that house. I told Sean, but he was actually pleased to inherit it. It brought him no financial benefit. But he seemed happy, so I didn't say anything else. Following John's will, Sean inherited the house. Elizabeth was happy and paid the inheritance tax. He's our heir, after all, she said. Well, she wasn't wrong about that. I felt a bit down, as if Sean had been taken away from me, but then something unbelievable happened.
Come to our house?
Upon receiving Matthew's call, I immediately headed to my in-laws' house. There, I saw Elizabeth and Matthew standing dumbfounded in front of the house, just like I had once. Heavy machinery and a truck bearing the demolition company's name, along with its workers, were on the property. Right before my eyes, the in-laws' house was being demolished. What's going on?
It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right?
Sean replied, appearing seemingly out of nowhere, looking satisfied as he watched the demolition.
Sean, what are you doing? Stop this immediately.
Even if I stop it now, it's not like we can live in it.
Sean, how could you do this?
Elizabeth and Matthew pleaded with him, crying. But Sean just laughed.
Did you forget what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom?
Sean.
And Grandma, did you ever apologize for the terrible things you did to her?
His smile vanished, replaced by a sharp glare directed at Elizabeth and Matthew. With his sharp gaze, the two of them fell to their knees. The heavy machinery continued to tear down the house amidst the loud noise. This sight finally brought me some relief. Later, Matthew paid the damages and compensation using the inherited assets. It seemed Sean had recovered the stolen items Elizabeth had taken from my mother, and they were safely returned to me. You've got me and Ava, he reassured me, bringing tears of relief. Elizabeth and Matthew lost their house and didn't have any money left, so now they are back living in the company housing. Matthew had left the company housing with me and our kids before. But now he's returned with his mother, which has sparked a lot of rumors. A wife of one of Matthew's colleagues, who I'm on good terms with, contacted me about it, so I told her the whole story, without any lies or exaggerations. They'll probably have to live a cramped life in the company housing from now on, but it's their own doing. On top of that, with Matthew's retirement, the two of them have to be frugal to prepare for their future home. I think I'll occasionally bring this up as a topic of conversation with my friends, just to see how they are getting on. Meanwhile, I've been staying at Ava's place, but Sean is getting married. He plans to build a house. I was happy to hear that the land where the old house stood sold for a decent amount. It turns out that house was useful after all.
Mom, why don't you come live with us?
Sean kindly suggested. His future wife was also very welcoming. I couldn't stay with Ava forever, so I decided to take them up on their offer. I'm determined not to become a mother-in-law like Elizabeth, and look forward to living happily with my new family.